Welcome back to another Read and Correct with me, Kindar, the Tiger Writes, and Ty, the Tiger Supervisor. These are where I read a chapter of a story and correct it as I go. If you want to listen to these live, it's every Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. on Twitch. If you want to read the book, it's available on any major e-retailer. And if you want to support me directly, that's on my Patreon. Today we are doing Bottom Rung, Chapter 20. Can my problem be... Can my problem with the water essence cause me to hear things? Tibs asked as he followed Alistair. When he'd met him at the training tent, Alistair had told him they were going to a different location and hadn't elaborated. Tibbs had hoped to head to the guild. He wanted a sense of the building now that he was trying to plan something. He could enter whenever he wanted, but he didn't want to attract any attention doing it. Instead, they headed away from it. What are you hearing? The older rogue asked, sort of like scratching. At first, I thought it was rats because I heard it in the boulder room, but I hear it in the trap room too, and I know there's nothing there. I thought it might be the traps resetting, but I played with the ones we train, and nothing sounds like it. The teacher said that the dungeon only resets the trap. Reset? The dungeon only resets. No. The trap when we're outside, but he couldn't tell me why and trailed off. No, I'm not sure what I heard. Do you hear it all the time? Alistair asked, but he didn't sound worried. Tibbs thought about it. He hadn't considered that before. Just in the dungeon? Then it may be related to your essence, but not how you fear. He added as Tibbs began to worry. The dungeon is the only place you have to strain yourself to use your water essence because your life depends on it. It's a strain that has been known to cause people to hear, see, even think something unusual was happening. You don't need to worry about it. As you gain as you gain experience, you'll catch up to where you should be with your essence. The noise will go away. Tib saw the platform along with a long line of people waiting on it, and like before, Alistair stepped up, ignoring everyone who came before him. He stopped before the circle on the platform, since a family, along with one of the attendants in the golden robe, were already within it. Tib studied the woman as she gestured, noting her eyes matched the gold of her robe. If he understood what she did and could recreate it, he'd be able to leave if he needed to. Watching won't help, Alistair said as they disappeared in the multicolored glow. She doesn't need to do the motion. They just act as a mnemonic system to create the right mindset. It's like the exercise of drawing with your knife as you channel the essence through it. Once you're skilled enough, you will no longer have to do it that way. You'll simply hold the knife and create the right mindset. Alistair stepped on and a different attendant joined them, standing next to the rogue. If you watch, you'll see I don't use the same motions. As he said, that his motions were different, and then they were in the cavern with the falling. This I'm going to have to change at some point. This doesn't work. There, I didn't. I did not exactly know how Essence was working when I wrote this, and ultimately, Alistair should not be able to say. As he said, the motions were different, and then they were in the cavern with the falling water in the distance and the heavy humidity. I don't know what that mem words means. Tibbs turned once they were off the platform, and the attendant simply vanished in a glow of color. He hadn't made any motion, only smiled as Tibbs, as if he was making a point. It's just another word for remembering, Alistair said. Alistair had kept going down the large hall, and Tibbs caught up to him. Am I getting another audience? He asked hopefully. If we could speak with Water again, maybe she could explain how to contact the other essences. Alistair shook his head. As I said, you only get one audience. We're trying something different today. But what if Water wants to talk to me? Alistair looked at Tibbs. The elements aren't like us. They don't want to do with us or anything else. They simply are what they represent. So water doesn't want to see you now that he's accepted you. Why do you say he? Water sounded like a man to me. Like my father, actually. I can't tell you why, but you're sidetracking us with your curiosity. Mr. chuckled. I'm going to teach you something you wouldn't normally learn until row. But I think that it's going to help you compensate for your lack of a reserve. He turned into an opening that had been closed before, but it was a hall instead of a room. Tibbs noticed most of the rooms were open this time. Maybe they only closed them when someone used it for an audience. And every runner had their audience now. Then why were a few of them still closed? The sound of falling water became louder as they walked, as did the humidity, and in the distance he saw mist before reaching the end. Alistair entered a room with even more humidity than the hall. A wall of water rose to close it. A wall of water rose. A wall of water rose to. Oh, the opening. To the room. Close the opening. A wall of water rose to close the opening once it was inside, and once it turned to ice, the sound of the falling water became a low and distant rumble. His teacher sat in the middle of the room, crossing his legs, and Tibbs followed suit. But as flexible as his armor had gotten over the weeks, the hardened leather and softer one in the joint weren't flexible enough to let him fully cross his legs. Do you know what essence is? Alistair asked. It's what I manipulate. Correct, but what is it? Tibbs shrugged. Essence is the force that binds our world together. Each one is connected to something fundamental. Water, fire, earth, air, light, purity, darkness, and corruptions are considered the strongest of them, the most vital. Corruption is vital? Tibbs asked doubtfully. Yes, but this isn't the corruption we think of when we think of a corrupt guard or king or guild, Tibbs thought. That kind the world could do without. Here, it refers to the breaking down of things, of their essence. Is that why corruption is also called a breaking down of morality? The question earned him a stare. However, some older thugs trying to work out what morality was once. Alistair chuckled. Your street is rather interesting. It's unfortunate Tyrannia doesn't know where you're from. I would love to visit it. But I suppose that's possible. A historian or linguist would be in a better position to answer that. To answer. If you want, I can see about putting you in contact with one. Tip shook his head. His teacher might be well intentioned, but he didn't want to give the guild more excuse to charge him yet more coins. More gold coins. Then to continue with my lesson. What the average person tends to forget, if they knew at all, is that essence isn't this. He patted the stone ground, or this, he moved his hand to the hair, or even this, he formed a ball of water. It isn't any of those things. Essence is what those things are made from. Do you understand? Dave shook his head. Alistair chuckled. It took me some time, too. Take this ball of water. What did I do? Not the obvious, Alistair said sternly as Tibbs rolled his eyes. Let me rephrase it. How did I form the ball? You used your essence. But what does that mean? Tibbs extended a hand, coated it with water, and tried to figure out what he'd done, how he'd done it. But he just had. I don't know. Alistair nodded. At this stage of your training, you're told what to do to make it work. I had you visualize getting your essence to flow out of your hand to form the water that coats it. And you practice that until you could. You learn what to do by rote without knowing why it works. It works. That's all you care about. Tibbs looked at his teacher. You push me too much for me to think you want me to say yes. Alistair smiled. Your situation is different, and you're more inquisitive than most of the rookies I've trained over the years. What changes once you reach Row is that you'll be expected to learn how and why doing something with your essence produces a specific result, and that means understanding essence itself. You want me to learn that now? Can I? If it's something normally taught at Row, doesn't that mean I need to be at that level first? You're going to find out the guild, like many large organizations in the world, does things the way it does simply because it's how it's always been done. By rote, Tib said, and Alistair chuckled. Or because that way is to their advantage. By rote means they don't understand why they do it a certain way. The guild usually knows why. Training you, the leveling system, it's a bit of a both, I suspect. It's been around for so long that we don't know entirely why that's how it's done. But also, the guild benefits by ensuring you move at a steady rate instead of letting you do things however you want. They can charge me more gold, Tib said bitterly. Alistair didn't immediately reply. And they can make sure you don't kill yourself, Tibbs. Working with essence unsupervised is dangerous. Maybe you could progress much faster on your own. But imagine accidentally having an audience, not knowing anything about what it entails. You didn't tell me anything about it. I told you to be careful, that it was dangerous, to respect the being you'd be speaking with. Imagine coming across water and knowing nothing. Tips could. He'd already been scared he was drowning. It would have been more frightening to notice something there with him not knowing and not know what it was. He would have lashed out. The guild benefits by ensuring you survive now that you can manipulate essence. So they want to make sure you take things at a safe pace. The dungeon isn't safe. Alistair tried to speak and finally rubbed his face. Tibbs, you're going to have to take me at my word. You have to take me at my word when I say the world isn't simple and that sometimes the safest way to do something is still dangerous. Tibbs nodded. His teacher was trying to help him. He wasn't gaining anything out of exasperating him. We start teaching you by rote so you can see you can do something. Once we start teaching you the how and the why, you already know what you're aiming for. That it is possible instead of floundering in the dark. And waiting until a certain point ensures you have a level of physical fortitude we can test. But the exercises themselves don't require it. So, essence doesn't come from inside me. It pulls the water out of the air. He took a chance, hoping that this would show he was back on track with the lesson. Alistair smiled. It looks that way, doesn't it? He moved his hand through the hair, collecting water. Only, what happens if you're in an arid place? Or what about if someone manipulating fire tries it in here? If the essence lets us pull out of the air or out of any something, how much of it is how much of it is around you would limit what you can do, no matter how powerful you are. Essence is water, but in its pure form, it is the idea of what water is. Tibbs rubbed his temple. This is going to be like learning the numbers. Alistair chuckled. We can stick with visualizing things the way we've been. I just need you to remember that's all it is. A way to visualize. It's not the truth of what the essence is. Now, close your eyes and focus on your reserve. It's going to feel like it's something inside you. Philosophers like to refer this as our core because of it. As our core because of it. Don't worry if it takes time. Some people can go months, years too. Got it, Tibbs said, deciding that was good enough a place to interrupt his teacher. He'd been able to feel his reserve from the start because of how stark the difference between how stark of a difference the thin surface was to the vast void underneath. All right, Alistair said, sounding surprised, but he didn't contradict him. I expect that when you feel it, it feels like water. Yes, water coating the surface of an orange, sticking sticking to it. Except the orange was nothing. He was already giving himself a headache. You need to let go of that idea. It isn't water. As in essence isn't a thing. It is the idea of the thing, of that thing. Like something that's broken up until you can't feel it anymore. That doesn't make sense. Tip stared at his teacher. The man's blue eyes fixed on him. If it's broken, then it isn't what it was anymore. It's something else. A shiver ran down Tibs. Exactly. Water wasn't water. Fire wasn't fire. They were made of what they were. Tibs closed his eyes. That made no sense. But the world didn't always make sense. Sometimes he had to find a different way to think about something so it would make sense. And once he did that in his mind, he usually found it also made sense in the world. It was easy. In his mind, water didn't have to be water. It was really easy. In his mind, it could be little bits of something else that wasn't water but also was. It was the simplest thing in the world. All he needed to do was see his reserve as that thing that was both water and not. Why can't I do this? Tibbs asked in exasperation. He cracked an eye open. Alistair's eyes were closed. He imagined himself floating on a lake. He didn't question how he could, it just was. Like water, it was and wasn't water. Below the surface was the void. He bobbed back and forth to the current of the waves. He dipped under and held his breath until he resurfaced. Above him was the sky, only he couldn't see it. When he tried, he thought he saw faint white lightning, except it was below him, not above. So he stopped trying. Right now, the sky didn't matter. He bobbed under another time, but now he forced himself not to hold his breath. When his mind told him he couldn't do that if he breathed water he'd drown, he told himself that in his mind it didn't matter. In his mind, water didn't have to drown him. In fact, it didn't have to drown him in the world either. He'd been underwater once and he'd been able to breathe. During his audience, he'd been underwater and yet he'd breathed normally. He no longer floated under the water. He took a breath of something that was and wasn't. That could be eventually, but not right now. This could be water if he wished it, and water decided it wanted to be. This was essence. And this concludes chapter 20 of Bottom Rung. If you are enjoying this, please leave a like. If you want to know when the next chapter is going to be up, subscribe and hit the bell. If you want to read this book, this story, it's available on Royal Road for free. If you want to read ahead and support me at the same time, that's on my Patreon. We're about 9 chapters ahead at this time. And if you want to listen to these live, it's every Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Time on Twitch. Links are in the notes. And I shall wish you a good day.